Success Insight shares the stories of the people with passion and drive who make things happen in the world. Here's your host, Howard Fox.
Hello, everybody. This is Howard Fox for my co-host Randy Ford on the Success Insight podcast. I want to welcome you to another edition. And a couple of weeks back, we were fortunate to get a note from a couple of authors who had this really cool book. And I don't know exactly how I would describe the genre, more fantasy, but what was really intricate about it is it took place in a kind of an alternative world, a fantasy world, so to speak. And I just thought, well, it's kind of fun because with this type of genre, there's always some underlying themes that I find fascinating, because I remember reading one of these books when I was a lot younger, and I had more time. And so I'm really excited to have these two talented artists on the Success Insight podcast today. So I am happy to welcome Jasmine and Kay West, and they are the co-authors of the Legends of the Eternal Realm series. And their first sub-series is called The Legend of Forsythia. The first book is called Foretold, and it is available on Amazon as well as on their website, which will give you all those great details later. But I want to welcome Jasmine and Kay to the Success Insight podcast.
Well, thank you very much, Howard. So my name is Jasmine, and we're going to be talking about The Legend of Forsythia.
Excellent. So before we kind of dive into The Legend of Forsythia, I would love to chat a little bit about your backgrounds, because you have a unique story of how you two met. And I always find that providing that kind of context is helpful for our listeners, because it kind of led into this little artistic endeavor that you both have. So if you could share that a little bit.
Yeah, we'd love to. First, let me just tell you the basic premise of the story so you can kind of follow along with our background.
Okay. Excellent.
So our story is about teen and young adults training for and joining a 25-year-old conflict. It takes place in a world where magic is just a facet of science. It's commonplace, but not all-consuming. The story is set as a history and follows a number of characters with a narrator who guides you through it, so you don't have to worry about getting confused. The chapters rotate point of view in a 3-chapter cycle, starting with the leading main character. It follows her converting the son of the antagonist, who came to kidnap her, but was kidnapped instead. The second chapter follows the protagonist's direct companions as they round up their scattered forces in preparation for their counterattack. And the third chapter is set 4 years in the past and follows a slightly younger group as they train for a war most of them don't want anything to do with, and gradually mature as both people and a team. So when we started out, we didn't know most of these characters.
Okay.
And the first write-up that I did for this series was a 7th grade short story, and I only knew about 4 characters there, one of which was that son of the antagonist who got kidnapped. When I made it into high school, I started to actually write the full book, and then I began sharing it with my new friend, Kay. And that was where our story started to come together.
So Kay, I apologies for interrupting, but I am curious one thing, Jasmine. When you said you started when you were in 7th grade?
Yeah.
How did that, were you just like woke up one day and I have an idea? How did that start?
I've always had a very active imagination. I've been writing stories since I was 6 or 7. I'm a very big reader. So it was an assignment for class that we were supposed to write a story, and I put the pencil to the paper and it came out.
Okay. Excellent. Kay, welcome. So what is your part in this?
Well, Jasmine and I met in high school, and through a strange twist of events, we managed to become friends. It actually wasn't the first time we met. We had actually met in 4th grade. And after that grade, Jasmine moved to a different school, and I stayed where I was. So we re-met in high school and became friends. And as she was writing, her creative bug was just so infectious that I was inspired to write something myself. And I had envisioned a dark land ruled by a prophecy and suppressed by a dictator. And in order to thwart that prophecy, the dictator gathered up all the young men in the land and into these camps. And he was trying to find children that were prophesied. And he had no idea that those prophesied children would be girls.
So for both of your elements in the story, is one of you the force of good, so to speak? And if I'm wrong, I know you're going to let me know this. Is there a force of good and a force of evil, light, darkness, right or wrong for both of us?
Yes and no. It's not like I write for the force of good and she writes for the force of dark, but we do cover both points of view. So we'll explain how those worked.
Okay.
We are actually both writing for two different groups that have the same goal. And in the beginning, as they started out as separate stories, those groups started pretty far away from each other, and it took us a while to combine them. So Kay mentioned a prophecy just now. My story centered around a similar prophecy. I had a chosen generation of 6 prophets, but for me, 3 were male and 3 were female. And then there's all the relations that supported them. In the beginning of the planet's existence, there was a prophecy in my story that forewarned of a distant war and the generation who would end it. So we started looking at our stories and say, we both have 6 prophets. We both have a prophecy about this war. A lot of these are the same.
Wow.
After a certain point, as we were progressing with our stories, I really became quite concerned that people would think I was copying what Jasmine was writing, because there were just so many similarities between the stories, and that really terrified me. And I told this to Jasmine, and she had a brilliant idea at the time, and it really shocked me.
Okay.
What if they're the same because they're part of the same story? What if your dictator is my antagonist? What if your dying land is my sister nation? And so we just merged the 2 stories. They became one.
That's amazing. Now, as you sat down and realized you're writing stories that are their, I don't know, images, mirror images of each other, or reflections, so to speak. And if I'm wrong, you're going to correct me. Once you realize there's some similarities here, what was the process of sitting down and coming to terms with that fact, and then deciding, here's how we bring these 2 parts together?
Reflections is a very good way to put it. And it was a long process, but we'll tell you about it.
Okay.
So obviously we merged them because they were so similar, but obviously we had a lot of problems that brought up issues due to the differences. One of the first and biggest problems that we dealt with was the dictator's methodology from my story. Jasmine felt it didn't make sense for him to assume that the chosen prophets would be male, and she didn't agree with him mass gathering them either.
So when we first started reading the stories, I just thought that was cool. But when we combined it, I said, well, if this is the same antagonist that I have, is he just really that stupid? I mean, I think he's more intelligent, more cunning, and way harder to slip past. So now we had to reconcile these different concepts, and especially without offending or running over each other. So we had to ask, how can both work? How can he gather without it just being ridiculous or over the top? And from those discussions, we realized he had the ability to sense magic. Thus, those who were gathered were only a few, as magic was rare on Kay's dying land.
And from that change, the dictator gradually became our present-day Miento, the antagonist. And as he took shape, so did the dying land, Fortissimo. Years later, those aborted large-scale camps resurfaced in the form of the Glass Lake, an overflowing training grounds of impassioned, deceived citizens of Fortissimo.
So that was a really cool moment for us because in the beginning stages, we said, okay, so he doesn't gather them all. But as the story develops, it turns out he does gather them all, but it's willing this time. They're all summoning as his soldiers.
Interesting. So I'm curious, as you then address this, there's a reflection here. Now we've got to bring these pieces together. What was it like? I mean, just kind of the human element for you two is, what was it like in the conversation? Did you you get up and just start chatting, talking, working? How do you get into the headspace of, we've got to work through this? Either we're on a path, a track that we like, that this is working, or our paths are kind of garbled a little bit. I'm really kind of messing up my words, but I'm just wondering, what was it like to kind of resolve your creative differences, each of your creative differences, and to realize this is what the path that we need to take looks like? I don't know if that makes sense.
It does. We got it. Don't worry. There's kind of two generations for that, because part of the story took place in high school. So at that time, you'd find us with our desks together and a notebook out. And we'd be asking each other questions like, okay, well, I think that this happens. Or the biggest thing was why? Why would he do this? Why does it make sense? And by asking why, we'd both sit there and think about it, and the answer would come to either one of us. And we'd tell that, and the other would go, I agree, that sounds right. And then sometimes, so why does it happen?
As you're going through this process, I'm wondering too, is it just the two of you, or are there others that, we got to bounce an idea off of? Like, it's like me going to my best friend or my sister. Okay, I've got this idea. What do you think? There's no right or wrong. It's just an idea. I just want your feedback. Had you done any of that, or are you two relying just on yourselves at this point?
It's primarily between the two of us. We do have a few test audiences and people that we share things with, but only one of them has ever given us corrective feedback. Everybody else has just said, that was amazing, please read me more.
Okay. So tell us some more. Tell us more.
All right. Well, another conflict that we had to work out in the beginning was character names. Not nearly as dramatic as methodology of the antagonist, but important. So because of plot reasons, from the very beginning of Kay's first draft, her characters were named after gems. And I had a few characters that were related to those gems. So while she had a sapphire and an emerald, I had a sapphira and an emerald. So that begat the question, what are we going to do with these names? We already have a lot of characters, but now we have some similar names. Is this okay? And there's so many gem names. Is this going to give us a bad reputation? What do we do? Do we change it? So we had to think a lot, and we seriously considered changing their names. There was a period of time where we looked at several alternatives. But in the end, Forsythia itself is the one who decided. The characters are who they are. Emerald and Emerald weren't too bad, but in order to help the readers, we changed the spellings of Sapphire and Sapphira. Sapphire went from the normal Sapphire to Saphyre, and Sapphira went from Saphira to Safira. So now there's a pretty big distinction between a PH and a Y and an F and an RI.
Wow. I just find it amazing that you both even had names that were similar. That's actually kind of scary.
No, it is. We could tell everything about the stories. We say, these line up, these fit together. And that was why we couldn't change it in the end, because in that world, many people are named after gems because it's a part of their history.
Very interesting. And as the book goes on in within Foretold, and how many books do you envision within this first subseries?
Forsythia should be about 4 books. Originally, I thought it was 3 books, and then I started writing the second one, and I realized this was never going to work. So I had to expand it by a book.
Okay. Yeah, and please, whatever you do, if there is a movie deal that comes up, please don't be like George R.R. Martin or who's the Harry Potter?
J.K. Rowling for
J.K. Rowling.
the author.
And make things up. After book 4, I was like, no more. I think this is going to be a 10-book series. If you're good, at least if you do commit to that, please write the books.
Yes.
No, I don't think I'm going to outlive George R.R. Martin's books. I'm scared of that right now. So you got a 4-book series. Now, Foretold came out...
It came out last year.
Last year. And so what has been the reception for the book so far?
Actually, we're in a pretty interesting position since we were able to self-publish. We are not focusing on marketing personally.
Okay.
Marketing is obviously important, and we'd like to do that. But for the moment, we're taking the opportunity that we have to continue focusing on writing.
Okay.
Now, the reason for this, we needed to publish to be able to move on to a new stage in our personal life. We spent a decade working on Foretold, and so it was a pretty big deal to actually get it published.
That's commitment, by the way. 10 years.
It is. Well, we'll talk about that when we get there, but we're still, you were still asking about some of the hurdles we had to overcome. So Kay has a few to share with you.
Oh, okay.
So some more hurdles that we had to deal with were things like merging character roles. We had certain characters that did certain things, and sometimes those just didn't work out.
Once we combined it, those roles changed.
So initially I had a character named Karnak, and he was a hidden guide responsible for gathering up the 6 girls and acting as a narrator. And he also gave my initial prophecy. And as time passed, that changed completely, with all those roles being dispersed. The one who gathered the girls became Emrod, and the hidden guide became his father, and the prophesier simply vanished, and Karnak also disappeared. And the record keeper, Oops, took over his territory as the narrator.
So combining characters there was a lot going on there. We had to figure out who was responsible for what, but that's also always the path that breaks down the roadblocks. So one of the biggest obstacles that came to getting the finished version of Foretold was both caused and solved by characters. So in my freshman and sophomore year, I had completed and edited the base version of Forsythia, where Kay's characters were off-screen doing their own thing. Even though we had joined them, they weren't actually in one volume yet. But after I got to that point, my progress totally stalled. And it wasn't until after I was out of high school that I was able to get it back by starting the series over. So I had a few attempts that ended disastrously. One lasted half a page, and the next lasted a few pages. In that second attempt, I altered the Earth life of the beginning set of characters from a terrible orphanage to a normal boarding school. And that direction change helped us to realize what needed to happen with the story. So from there, I was able to get my flow back, and I got a full 4 chapters done. Now, this was before we did the chapter rotation. So at that 4th chapter, I started with a flashback to show how these girls had arrived at Earth. And that's when I met Tayoko. And he will always be one of the most famous characters in our hearts. Since we had several characters, Tayoko was not a role to be developed. I was exceedingly proud the day I wrote about him because he was a no-name character that existed for 3 lines and then faded out of existence. But he disagreed with me completely.
Okay.
He pestered me relentlessly, telling me that he belonged in this story. He was a core member, and it was my missight that I didn't know about him before this. He made me rewrite the first 4 chapters.
You know, there is a book I was introduced to the other day from my business partner on our podcast, and it dealt with, you know, developing high performance, you know, whether you're a leader or an athlete. And part of the construct of this concept was you have to have an alter ego, somebody that when you can't speak or you're going into an unfamiliar situation, somebody's speaking for you. So as you were sharing about Tayoko, I'm thinking somehow that's your unconscious saying, Jasmine, you're making a mistake here. I think you really need to go back and look at this because I belong here.
Exactly. The story always tells us the way it needs to go. That's where we start getting writer's block, is if we're not going in the right direction, we can't do it. When we stop and ask, what went wrong? Where am I going wrong? Then if we listen hard enough, the story says this or that. You messed up a few chapters back. Go back and correct it. And that can take a pretty big toll sometimes.
No doubt. I mean, it's almost as though the story is your characters, or you're asking yourself, what would, for example, say, Tayoko say, or Tayoko do, or one of the other characters, what would they do in this situation?
Mm-hmm. The way we look at it is, this is a history. It's already happened, and we just need to correctly write down how it happened.
Gotcha.
So after I realized that Tayoko did indeed exist, I had to rewrite those chapters twice. The first time, I just added him in exactly as I found him, as somebody who was already on Earth when these characters arrived. I got about halfway through the book, and I realized that's pretty dumb. Why did they go to Earth in 2 different trips when they're together? So I had to go back and fix it. So what other things do we have to fix, Kay?
So yeah, Tayoko isn't the only thing that made us rewrite. Because the stories started as separate, even though we acknowledged that they were joined, how to actually join them was really rather difficult. We'd already been working on Forsythia for several years, with Jasmine running ahead at full steam, and around this time, we started having a few moments where we just had to realize we were being ridiculous. For example, Jasmine had a special island remodeled into a training ground for her characters, but one day we realized, hey, if we have such a specialized training ground, why does only half the group use it? So we adjusted for both of our characters to train on the island on Zen. But since we were coming off the previous mentality, we still kept them as separate groups. Your characters will train over there, mine will train over here. And it took us a lot longer to figure out that
it didn't make sense.
That was just ridiculous.
They're together. So in present day, you couldn't get one without the other. It just doesn't make sense. So we also had discrepancies in our visions and understanding of the territory. We have a map for it, and the map is actually pictured on the book cover. So after we started writing, I placed a set of islands on this map, and I decided that they fit perfectly into this triangular little bay that belonged to Kay. But that didn't match up with her understanding of the bay.
And as we learned more about the territories and the world and how things worked, my attachment to that bay kind of faded. And we discovered that importance that I felt towards that area came from something that happens in a later book. And in the present day, you know, I feel as if the Rayar Islands had always been there, that was always the way it was supposed to be.
Indeed. So likewise, not just territory, but we had a lot of struggles when our characters meet. You know, we're writing for different characters, but they interact. And so there was several battlegrounds of trying to respect what the other person wanted to write while saying, hey, they did not say that.
I'm amazed at you've got the overarching story, you've got time and place, you've got, language, customs, and just the communication and what would people say, how would they say it. I think the creative process here, I mean, just as you've just both described it, it's amazing that you're still working together, because I imagine it's just a lot of, there's just a lot, I imagine a lot of emotion, mental energy going on as you're evolving this.
Yeah, there were lines that took weeks to resolve, and there were other lines that we disliked, but we just had to let go of for the sake of peace. Thankfully, it didn't stay like that, though.
Yeah.
So as we read over each other's work, we would also make suggestions. So not just with our character interactions, we just edit each other's work. And sometimes those suggestions were fiercely rejected. we just had to live with the fact that we hated the other's line. However, a decade after our start as freshmen, we finished writing in 2016 and proceeded to the editing stages. At that time, we found that those lines that we fiercely defended, we didn't care about anymore, and we changed them to something the other agreed with.
Other issues we had included formatting. When we started writing, we hadn't even agreed on a font. So Jasmine was typing in Times New Roman, and I was typing in Calibri, because those were just what our computers were set to. And both of us found it incredibly difficult to read the other's font. And so about halfway through, we finally settled on the font Book Antiqua, which was somewhere in between the two, and we could both deal with it.
That's amazing. So, I'm curious in the time we have left, as looking back for you both. I mean, you've produced the book, which in and of itself, and I think I might have mentioned to Jasmine when we first met, I mean, I've written a book and a half. I co-authored, and then I wrote one book, and it was like birthing a baby. It was so painful. But you both have birthed this baby, so to speak, this entity, and it's a remarkable achievement, and you also have more books to come. And what did it feel like once you did all the writing, you did the editing, agreed on the font, the cover, the artwork? What did it feel like for you both when this was, you look back and say, wow, we did this? What did it feel like for you?
It was an interesting time. As we were editing, we were reading to some test audiences, and as we finished our final edits for each chapter, we would read them to our audiences, and the reactions were really inspiring. It's not really much of a feeling that can be described.
Okay. I was hoping that one of you could gift us with just a passage from the book. I just love being able to ask my guests to do this, and if they're willing to. It's a little bit of a setup to my guests, because I did ask them already, they agreed. But I would love if just share a passage from the book and why it's important. What's the message that it conveys, just that we can leave this with our audience.
All right. Well, we can each share a passage provided we have the time for that.
We can do anything we want. It's my show. I can do what I want.
All right. Well, since Kay was just talking about that test audience, this passage has particular importance both inside the story and outside, because this was the first time that Kay received acknowledgement for her work from other people. So go ahead and read that.
Okay, so this is the chapter 3 note, which was one of the first passages that I kind of wrote on my own. Jasmine did help me write it in the end, but it all came from one idea that I had.
Okay.
So the note goes like this. When you look into a mirror, what do you see? To most, the answer appears to be a reflection. A reflection, tied to reality in inexplicable ways, a perfect mimicry. They are right, a perfectly empty mimicry. A mimicry, an imitation, an incomplete copy made out to be the original. An imitation cannot be the original. An image reflected in a mirror does not contain the life of the original. It has no presence. So long as they are divided, reality and its reflection cannot truly be one. Time changes the reflected and the reflection, and the gap between them widens. Time introduces events, making changes to the original which cannot be reflected. If you set a chest in front of a mirror, the contents will never be reflected. If the contents change 1,000,000 times, the reflection will stay the same. When something obstructs the view, the obstruction becomes the focus and the subject is lost. What is on the surface and what is beyond cannot be touched by a simple reflection. There is no depth. It is too limited, focusing on what is seen. Scars are visual stories about the scarred, obstructions which frequently distort the subject, failing to capture their redeeming attributes. Few are aware of the significance in the depths of scars. They are not limited to the skin. While you may misjudge a person for their external injuries, you can at least visually distinguish injury from subject. But internal scars disfigure personalities, injury indistinguishable from essence, changing who they seem to be, but not who they are. These scars are scars, separate from identity, but hard to discern and written off as the original. When scars run deep enough, when they become all-consuming, what becomes of the scarred? It is said that time can heal all, but what about when time stops? And that's the end of the note.
I am definitely going to have to go back and listen to that again because it was really, it's amazing. It's amazing. And it's just, what I love about it, it gives you pause to think of, and I love in our podcast, Kay, is the idea of transformation, change, insight. And I could tell there was a just the message behind this passage is fantastic. So thank you. So now we have Jasmine, and this is what we talked about on our first call.
Yes, I will be reading the chapter 19 note. Now, to give you a tiny bit more context, the notes are something the narrator writes at the beginning of each chapter to either tell you something that will happen in the chapter or get your mind into the position for the coming events. Sometimes, to move forward, you have to go backwards. You have to review the past, learn from it, overcome it, or fix it. The past can push you forward, but you can't progress while carrying it. You must let it go. It does not belong in your arms or on your back. It is your foundation. Whether you like your past or not, what you build on it is your choice, where you walk from it. Awful pasts can create great people. They can break people. Good pasts can prepare excellent people. They can spawn callous and ignorant. Who you are and who you become is not chained to your past, only built upon. You can work to be different, to resolve the things you didn't like, to keep them from repeating, to be aware of them. You can fight to live up to the things you liked, to retain them, to be aware of them. Be the person you want to be. If you are not that person, become it. Who is going to stop you? Those around you? Yourself? Are you going to cry and say you can't change? That it's too hard? There's no point? Is it possible for there to not be a point? If you have decided you aren't strong enough, if you are so lost you need to ask what the point is, I will tell you, your happiness. It's hard, so being the person you don't want to be isn't hard? It's not painful? How is such an unhappy life any better than the hard struggle to become who you want, to achieve happiness? Is that not all the reason in existence to fight as hard as you can, no matter what you face, no matter how weak you think you are? Whose lullaby are you falling asleep to, thinking there's no point? Who is lying to you that it's not worth the effort to become the type of being you want to be? Between being happy and not, isn't that your answer? Take courage. You are strong. And that's the end of the 19 note.
Now that one, as a coach and somebody who's involved in change, the work that I do, that just completely resonates for me. And it's like I'm trying to, as I'm listening to it, my eyes are closed, I'm appreciating it. And I'm also thinking, how can I leverage it in my own work? So we're going to have a conversation afterwards. Jasmine and Kay, I want to thank you so much for taking time out of your creative day to spend with me and our listeners on the Success Insight podcast. If my guest would like to learn more about you both and your work, where's the best place for them to go?
That would be our website, Lotter Online, LOTER online.com. Naturally, that's short for Legends of the Eternal Realms. Excellent. We have all the updates on our story up there. We have character art up there, and that's the only place it's available.
Fantastic. And we'll also put a link to the website on our show notes, and we also will provide to the Legends of the Eternal Realms, the Legends of Forsythia, and Book 1, Foretold, which is available on Amazon, and we'll provide a link to that as well. Again, Jasmine and Kay, I really appreciate, this was by far the most complex, free-flowing interview that I've had. And we are definitely over 30 minutes, so that's okay. Because, just sometimes writing is complex. And I can tell that is the time that you both have devoted individually and together as partners to create this, of this book, this work of art. To me, it's an amazing process, and I'm clearly very impressed, and wish you both much success for it and for your future works together. So thank you again for joining us on the podcast today.
Yes, thank you so much for having us.
Yes.
So listen, if you stay on the line for just a second, we're going to sign off, and then we'll come right back to you, okay?
All right.
There you have it, folks. This was Jasmine and Kay West, and they were chatting about their book from the series of Legends of the Eternal Realm, and this was the Legend of Forsythia, and they spoke specifically about Book 1, which is Foretold. Again, we'll put a link back to their website, Legends of the Eternal Realm, on our show notes, as well as the link to Amazon.com. I hope you enjoyed it. I hope you enjoyed those readings as well. I just love that feature of our show when our guests are willing to gift us with a little passage from the books. And so that was very special. So thank you, Jasmine and Kay. Wherever you are, whatever you're doing, go out there, have a phenomenal day, make a difference in this world, and enjoy yourselves while you're doing it. This is Howard Fox, my co-host, Randy Ford. You've been listening to the Success Insight podcast. Have a great day.
Success Insight is a production of Fox Coaching and First Story Strategies. Find us online, successinsightpodcast.com.